Today I'm here with Clay Olson. He is the founder and owner and CEO, right, of Fight the New Drug. I'm actually really excited to have him here today for several reasons. Not only because I've kind of joined in on this with you guys, but also because I had heard about Fight the New Drug a while ago. And I remember thinking to myself, who's doing this? This is so cool. This is something that I am so passionate about. Well, you know that
Yeah.
from meeting with me several times. But can you explain a little bit about what Fight the New Drug is and how it came about?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you
Yeah, of
for
course.
having this conversation. It's great. I love being able to talk about this issue that I'm also very passionate about, and you and I have connected on that, and this is a necessary conversation. So, Fight the New Drug started 15 years ago.
Wow, I
It's
didn't know that.
crazy to think about it being that long. But I started it back in college with some friends, and it really stemmed from so Fight the New Drug. For those of you who may not be aware, it is an organization, a nonprofit organization, dedicated to raising awareness on the harmful effects of pornography and other forms of sexual exploitation using science, facts, and personal accounts.
I
So it's
love
a
that. Love that.
yeah
Data oriented.
data focused. So it's not like a moral crusade.
Yeah.
It's not legislatively focused. It's really focused on awakening a generation to the realities on how it is affecting individually, relationally, and societally. And by doing that, we create a groundswell of awareness in our communities and our culture that then spark other possible and necessary adjustments in our society, which we'll talk more about. But that's kind of the focus. Our objective is not to limit the supply, but rather decrease demand through education.
I love that.
And that approach has opened up a lot of doors in public schools and universities around the world. And it's been amazing. So that's Fight the New Drug. It started back when I was in college. I had, on a personal level, I had a cousin who struggled with pornography. And this is before what young people have access to today. So this is
Oh
like
gosh.
back in
Playboy.
in the days of magazines and
Yeah.
hiding them underneath your mattress or whatever. And so he had access, and he's quite a bit older than I am, and he developed a compulsivity. What he would identify as an addiction for him led him to need more often, and a more extreme or hardcore version, which led him eventually to act out in with a minor, which was not only wildly inappropriate but also very illegal, and he went to prison, and that was really hard in my family. I mean, to this day, we have family members that won't speak to one another.
Oh, so
And
sad.
so that was kind of a spark of intrigue for me. It was like I saw how it led to, in fact, years later when he got out of prison, I was naive enough and still young enough. I had just graduated high school, and I said, can you tell me like what led you to that? And he told me, he said, look, Clay, had I known what pornography was, what it had the capacity to do in my life, I'd have never touched this stuff. And that was like a little bit shocking to hear. I was like,
Because everyone downplays it.
yeah. And I like I was like, really? Like pornography led to that? Are you kidding me? So of course, there's a lot of research now that helps us understand that more. But at the time, it was just like so shocking to me.
Yeah.
And so a few buddies of mine, we were up on campus at a university here in Utah, and we thought, well, this is a topic that our generation is dealing with more so than previous generations. This is something that's kind of unique to our day,
Yeah.
and it's something that not a lot of people are talking about. And we had started a club. This is more information you need, but we had started a club up on campus that was super cheesy. It was called EDGE, which stood for Entrepreneurs Dedicated to Great Endeavors. We just
It's not cheesy.
we
I mean,
hadn't
that's
started
great.
anything, but we were just like we were ambitious. We wanted to do something that made a dent. And I remember in one of those meetings, somebody mentioned that it would be cool to do something on this topic, and I thought, and it was like a lightning bolt hit me. I was like,
Wow.
oh my goodness, we need to do something. And at the time, I owned a creative agency. And I was thinking, well, I have the resources. Let's just do a campaign. Let's like build something similar to the Truth Campaign Against Tobacco, if you remember
Yes. And
those
that was
days.
so
Yeah,
effective.
that was very successful. It
So
was
effective.
funded by the government, but that really helped shine a light on like the science of what tobacco did, and they packaged it in a way that connected and resonated with young people.
Oh my
So I
gosh.
thought, let's do a similar thing for a topic that nobody wants to talk about, pornography.
Right.
And at the time, people just said, you're crazy. Nobody will ever like this. This is gonna flop. But I felt so strongly, like almost like looking back on it, I'm like, then I should have been. Like it was almost like I felt like this draw to this that I pushed aside logic and reason a little
Yeah.
bit. And I
Which
just
is a
kind of feel like,
blessing.
yeah, I tell young entrepreneurs all the time, like, don't let go of the youthful naivety that you have.
Yes.
That is what allows you to
Ignorance
push
is
through
bliss. Keep it.
adults would say, oh, it's impossible, but young well-directed naivety really is what allows you to dream big. And then so yeah, I did. I was just like, this is going to work. We're going to do this, and it's going to be impactful. And so that was the process. We started doing some research up on campus and found what we felt was a mountain of evidence and research on the topic. And now, today, looking back, that was a molehill compared to the mountain that we now have of
Wow.
research. And so, but we thought, like, gosh, people need to be aware of this. And so, with my creative agency, my creative background and storytelling, like we started like just developing material and content that connected with young people about like, here are the risks, consider before consuming, help them understand, what are the potential implications to myself, my relationships and society around me, regardless of my political or religious affiliations.
Sure.
Like let's talk on in a language that is universal, and that would be
Yeah.
kind of research and science. So anyway, that's how it all began, and it's been a journey since then.
And so you've seen all the data and numbers that you're getting back to, I mean, you'll never fully know like the full reach of what you're doing. But when you said groundswell earlier, it immediately made me think of, I remember when someone was talking about Fight the New Drug. This is a couple of years ago. And I remember thinking like that is so amazing what they're doing. And I had already heard of it somewhere, I was like, it was familiar to me.
Yeah.
And so I know that it's reaching a lot of people. I sincerely hope it's helping them. I mean, I'm sure you have data on that. Do you mind answering for me? I mean, I don't, part of me, I'm like, I don't want to scare people, but at the same time, I think it's like you said, people need to talk about this. They need to know what are some of the most home hitting statistics that you've seen of what pornography can actually do.
There's a lot of stats. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of evidence that talk about some of the research coming out of Cambridge, some of the research coming out of Yale, some of the research coming out of institutions like the Gottman Institute in Washington, indicating pornography's impact on individuals' relationships. And so, as I've said, but as you dig into that more deeply, you start to understand how pornography, on a neurological level, is rewiring an arousal template of minors, particularly minors, but adults as well, to a level that is reshaping our ability to connect with one another. And you see that, like their understanding of simple concepts of like love and intimacy and consent is shaped in many cases based upon what they're consuming on a regular basis. And we know, thanks to neuroplasticity, we know that the brain can change and morph and adapt to what it's consuming on a regular basis. And so when we are consuming pornography at a very young age, which is younger and younger. Some studies are showing that average ages, it varies depending on the study, but some studies are showing that average age is as young as 8 years old. And then some up to 11 years old, but nonetheless, you're in that pocket of average, meaning we've received emails from some kids as young as 7 years old, not just saying, hey, I was exposed to this, what is this? Saying, I am struggling, I can't stop, help me. 7 years old. And we get these emails and we get these messages, which by the way are in the hundreds of thousands that we received. Our reach now is in the tens of millions annually, where we're reaching out. We have presenters around the world. We've trained presenters here locally in the United States. We have amassed a sizable social media following. So we're pushing out material and content and studying and surveying and researching. And the scope of this issue is a complete blind spot to most people, because it's a secretive issue, and so most people are unaware of like this scale of this.
Yeah, you're not going around telling people you look at pornography.
Yeah, and you can see the domino effect, like as it impacts us as individuals, and as it impacts us, particularly at young ages, and then those young individuals develop into seeking out real relationships. the type of material that they're consuming. Parents have often told me, well, hold on, pornography's been around since
Not like
forever.
this.
Exactly. Like, so what's the big deal? And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I've sometimes, jokingly compared it to like a baby kitten, to now today, like a saber-toothed tiger with lasers coming out
Oh
of its eyes. Like,
yeah.
it's a totally different world today.
Yes.
And parents are completely oblivious. We often talk about the accessibility, but what we don't often talk about is that the content itself has changed over the years to be much more aggressive, much more fetish, much more violent. Some studies have shown that the most popular consumed pornography is either aggressive or physically violent against women. And those women, what's shocking about those studies is that those women in those scenes are not responding with, hey, don't do that. That's not okay. They're responding either with no response at all or with pleasure, which then what does that kind of reinforce
Yeah.
in that adolescent, that this type of behavior, this abuse, this verbal or physical abuse toward this individual during these intimate experiences is not only what they want, but where they find pleasure. And there's so many stories and police reports of young boys, 16 years old, 17 years old, that are picked up by law enforcement because they were choking their date or not, because that's what they thought that they were supposed to do, or that's what they
gosh.
liked in the scenes that they saw online. And when that is kind of reinforced at a very young age, and at a frequent pace, because the accessibility is unlimited and not and available at any time through their smart device, it really warps their arousal template on a very physiological level, which makes it really difficult for them to develop healthy relationships in the future when they actually encounter real humans. And in fact, there's a ton of research coming out that show that young boys that have been exposed at a young age, which is 99% of boys, young boys,
Don't tell me that. I have three boys.
When they develop that type of access, and they develop those type of behaviors, and they seek that out on a regular basis, that their interest in a real human experience declines dramatically, because that real physical experience, it takes work, it takes back and forth, and oftentimes when they get married and they're intimate, their partner gets tired. They have
Pregnant.
they're pregnant. They have it's that time of month. They have weird in-laws, or they just got in a fight, or something of that nature. All that is kind of work where they can turn to something that does not require any work, that is available at any time, is whatever you want it to be, whenever you want it to be. No human can compete with that type of access. And what we're now emerging into, what we're seeing now with the emergence of AI, and
Yes.
some of the access study just recently came out suggesting that Gen Z, I believe it was 70% of the Gen Z members that were surveyed were open to a romantic relationship with AI.
Yeah, I saw this. I saw
Yeah,
this
and
study.
it's like we're
How
pouring
stupid
gasoline
is that?
onto an existing bonfire, and the implications to relationships moving forward are quite serious. And we need to wake up. We need to link arms with anybody willing to talk about this, not just siloed dialogues within particular congregations or particular regional areas, and have a very serious national and international discussion about how we proceed forth.
Well, how do we go forward then? That's like, what do you say? So, for example, I have an 8-year-old. He'll turn 9 this year. I have a 6-year-old turning 7, and then I've got a baby boy. What do I do to prevent that from happening?
Well, I think that there's a couple different ways we can answer that. And let's come back to your personal, what do we do as like a parent?
Yeah.
And let's start with maybe the broader conversation of like, what do we do societally?
Sure.
And I think a good kind of parallel with that would be the tobacco industry. Back in 1938, Dr. Raymond Pearl was a researcher, professor at Johns Hopkins University, and he was the first individual to discover the link between smoking tobacco and lung cancer.
Wow.
And that was a big discovery. And you would think that immediately following that discovery, this would potentially save millions of lives over time. And so you'd think that there'd be parades and statues erected in his honor, but none of that happened. His research was squashed by the Goliath industry at the time, which was the tobacco industry. And he died 40 years later and never was alive to see his research see the light of day. But 15 years later, Reader's Digest came out with an article called "Cancer by the Carton," which they were funded in a different way. They were the first magazine to be funded by a subscription, not advertisements, which tobacco dominated. So because of that, they were able to kind of publish whatever they wanted, and they published an article called "Cancer by the Carton," which was the first public attack on the tobacco industry. Which started to suggest that there was something wrong with this, because at the time everybody smoked, and there was no smoking areas. It was just smoking was just universally accepted, and that launched a 40-year debate as to whether or not tobacco was indeed addictive or harmful, where doctors were paid to come out with there's you can look these up online, they're hilarious, these advertisements suggesting that tobacco is healthy, that it soothes the nerves, that cleans out the lungs.
You see the mom looking all cute in her
or
apron.
the doctor, a lot of them were like doctors prescribed, and it's just hilarious now because we now know. But it took that kind of groundswell, because that attack then triggered a lot of other research and a lot of other things, and a groundswell of knowledge and awareness on the public sector started to emerge, which then triggered eventually legislative action. And Attorney General in the 80s finally came out and publicly declared tobacco as an addiction and something that was harmful. And now today we look back and say we now tobacco and smoking is no longer quite the threat that it was. It still is around, but there are filters on them which weren't required beforehand for health purposes. They're behind counter. You have to show ID to get them. There are warning labels on them, and they're kind of like socially stigmatized. And so we are currently in that 40-year debate with regard to pornography. And we see a day in which we do look back and laugh at how accessible and how available we made pornography to minors and to adults.
Oh my gosh! And arguably, pornography is going to have worse effects than smoking.
It could have. I mean, it could have massively detrimental impacts to families and to individuals over time, like society as a whole. And it is. We're seeing the implications of that in a number of areas, including the Me Too movement and other areas. Yeah. But So I think there is a societal discussion, is like, what can we do? And I think the groundswell of awareness of taking the research, making people public aware, which is where Fight the New Drug kind of sits. It's like, it's really trying to drive a megaphone of awareness. Fight the New Drug isn't a 12-step program for those overcoming. There are wonderful organizations out there that focus on the actual rehabilitation process of recovery, which Fight the New Drug dabbles in and points to, but that's not the central focus. Fight the New Drug's focus is the awareness, is the taking the research, taking the information, the personal accounts, and
preventative more,
and pushing that out there so that people can be aware. And a lot of people in certain communities here in Utah, where we are now, there's a little more of a heightened awareness as to maybe the harms, but you take that nationally, that discussion nationally, and you tap anybody on the shoulder, like a 17-year-old kid in New York City on the shoulder, and say, hey, is pornography harmful? And say, of course not. In fact, it's healthy. It's a healthy outlet. And so we've got a lot of work to do. And even here in Utah and other areas, we've got a lot of work to do, and we're continuing to do that. And it starts with even in the home, you talk about, okay, what do I do as a parent? There's so many things that we can do as a parent. There's so many things that we need to be aware of. Not only we need to be more aware of the risks and harms of pornography as well, and not kind of put our heads in the sand as to like, this is not an issue. Again, it was around when I was a kid, and I'm fine. Parents need to understand, like, there's a story that kind of helps illustrate this. I was doing a presentation in Southern California somewhere, and a man came up to me. He's probably in his 50s at the time, so this is about 10 years ago. So he's probably 50 at the time. He's probably 60s now. And he came up to me and he said, hey, can I tell you my story? And I said, sure. And that happens all the time. And he pulls me aside and he said, look, I'm just now getting a grip on this in my life. Like, I've struggled virtually since I was a young child, or young. And he told me that it all started when he turned 16 years old, and his mother came in with a box of pornography magazines and put him on his bed and said, it's time he became a man.
Oh my
And she walked
gosh.
out the door. And it's interesting because like I tell that story and this is the reaction I get all the time. It's just like, are you kidding me? Like, what? Because can you imagine if that experience happened to every 16-year-old boy?
They're going to
Like
indulge, of course.
they're not only that, but it's going to develop into something. So like why would we push them with force from behind to struggle in that area? I mean, thank goodness, because when I talk to parents, and I ask, how many of you mothers did that to your 16-year-old boys? Not a hand goes up. And I'm like,
Right.
oh, thank goodness. And I ask, how many of you 16-year-old boys or girls, like when you turned 16, did your parent come in and say, hey, it's time you became an adult? And luckily, again, no hands are raised. So luckily, this story is an anomaly,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And yet, when we actually break it down, this is literally what is happening to every child today, except it's not at the age of 16. It's much younger. It's not a box of 100 magazines. It's unlimited. And it's not, the good old days of bare-chested women in cornfields. It's much more harmful and aggressive. So virtually that experience of that man that came up and talked to me is the experience that every child is experiencing for the most part. And that should like wake us up. So in some cases, I want to like wake parents up,
Yeah.
singe their eyebrows a bit and say
Right.
like, hey, let's kind of be aware of the reality that we are now living in. And other parents, I want to calm down because they're like pitchforks in hand, and they feel like
I'm
after
probably a pitchfork
two.
parent.
Well, like some parents, like their kid has seen pornography twice, and they're like, he's an addict,
Which,
and
yeah, no,
so
he's
it's
not.
kind of like, okay, I need to kind of calm you down and
Yeah.
like and talk about how to address this in a healthy way. And then I need to wake you up. But like,
Right.
I think we need to come together
Yeah.
and really start to have honest conversations about this. And so parents, one thing we say is like, get aware of yourself, become aware of the research, or become aware so that you can be the source of authority where the child comes to you and says, well, why is this harmful? That you're not just like, because I said so. Like a lot
Right.
of
So
parents,
right.
yeah, one kind of a methodology that we use is teach them the science, and teach them your family values and repeat. And a lot of parents skip number one and go right to two. And kind of hit on the because I said so, because it's a sin, because of whatever, and all that might be true, but they may not be subscribing to those belief systems just yet. In fact, a
Right.
lot of youth are still figuring out what they believe.
And they have friends that are over here telling them it's not that bad. It's not even a big deal.
Exactly, and even the media is
Oh, and yeah,
perpetuating that
everyone.
narrative. So we need to help them understand that there's like when you talk to your children about the reason they shouldn't smoke, it's not just because I said so or because it's a sin or it's not. It's because, well, guess what? It can lead to a short lifespan, and
Sure.
it can make your teeth fall out. All these things like, oh,
Right.
I don't want that to be a part of my life. Therefore, I'm going to steer it in a different direction.
So are you personally against kids having a phone?
Actually, I had this conversation yesterday. I think there are emerging options now that are much more healthy
Okay.
approaches. I am personally against. I have four daughters. My
Yeah.
oldest is 12 years old,
Yeah.
and I am not in favor of handing my 12-year-old daughter a smartphone.
Right.
In fact, no study that I have been encountered, and this is an area that I spend a lot of time in,
Sure.
there's not a single study that I'm aware of that suggests positive outcomes for particularly young girls to have access to a smartphone or social media. So I actually have a deal with my daughters, all four of them. The ones that I can, the two older ones that are of age that I can have this conversation with, that they are not. I kind of have a lump of sum of money that I've invested for them, and if they don't get social media until they graduate high school, that they get that whatever is
awesome.
accrued in that time as far as the investment goes and the interest that it's accrued. So we kind of have this agreement. We actually sign a document together, and where kind of social media is off, and it's not just kind of an abstinence approach. It's I'm also educating them. I'm
Sure,
talking to
sure.
them and helping them understand. And my oldest daughter, she doesn't want it because of what she is aware of, and
Yeah.
the mental health implications to social
Oh,
media,
yeah.
which is also a gateway to these types of behaviors and access. 95% of the access to inappropriate content comes through digital access.
So no phones would be well. I mean, that's your personal thing, but I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. But like, what else can we do? I mean, how else are kids seeing it if they don't? For example, my kids don't have a phone, and I don't know if I'm going to be this weird parent, but I don't foresee me giving them one, and for a long time,
Yeah.
I'll fill it out when I get there.
My daughters will probably graduate with phones that are more limited. Like
Yeah.
there are, the Gab phone,
Yeah.
they're coming out with other options, the Trumi phone,
Yeah.
the Pinwheel phone, and there's some others coming out as well, which have all the needed aspects of communication
You can call,
with
you can text.
exactly, and that don't have access to all the harmful material
Right.
that is really, again, this is the guinea pig generation. We didn't know what we now know, and the Surgeon General's messages about social media, particularly, but all the research that we now know about pornography, it's kind of like, look, do not risk it, parents. Do not risk it. And the more of us that are, waking up to these realities and looking at the data, more and more are linking arms and saying, you know what? We're going to make different decisions, because before we let the social pressures of I've got to have it because I'm the only one that doesn't have it and I won't fit in. I have talked to so many youth that their parents made similar decisions and they didn't give them access, where the kids themselves, by the time they graduated, were not only grateful for it, but they were advocates for the approach of saying,
Oh, 100%.
"I'm glad I never had access to that. I'm glad I didn't use social media. I'm glad that I didn't, because there was too much access to material that
Can ruin you.
can really spin you into different directions. Things that we never had to deal with when we were growing up.
So what about a TV in a kid's room?
I wouldn't do that.
What else? Okay, so no phones, no TVs, like,
Well, I would say, as far as phones go, if
or
you do
just
have phones,
a phone that's guarded.
yeah, I would use all the protections you can, and I wouldn't buy $1,000 computer in somebody's hand to give them a $300 access to that same phone.
Right,
Like,
right.
so if you're going to give them a limited phone, buy the limited phone,
Right.
which is going to be one of these other options that are
Yeah.
a couple $100.
Oh yeah, my kids leave stuff everywhere.
yeah,
I'm like, I don't want to go spend another $1,000.
Don't buy them an iPhone. Don't get them that. And then if they do have those things, make sure that, like, one thing that I really like that parents have done is that they have them charge them in their room. So
yeah.
you don't charge it
Turn
in
them
their,
in at a certain time.
turn them in, charge it in their phone, and then they go pick it up in the morning. Because nighttime is a time. My own niece, my sister, discovered that my niece, who had an iPod Touch but had internet access, was listening to music for weeks and weeks and weeks. Come to find out that they discovered that she was 8 years old, looking at hardcore pornography every
gosh.
night. And it started
8
because
years
somebody in school said something, and she was curious, and it developed into something. So don't risk it. Don't roll the dice.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
there's no reason to do that.
No, what do you get out of that? Yeah.
A great resource to look into. There's two great resources that I would point to for parents that are listening to this. Number one is a free resource called Raise. And if you go to joinraise.com, you'll be able to download a free app that basically helps you navigate the challenges of today's digital landscape. It has you can track each child and kind of different development stages, but you can also gain a lot of information that was developed with university professors, neuroscientists, and so a curriculum that covers everything from screen time to inappropriate content to cyberbullying. And so it's a great resource. Parents, go download that app. It's free. The other one is a documentary series that we worked for years on called Brain Heart World. And it was developed specifically to be able to be viewed with your family and your youth. A lot of documentaries, and this is a docu-series, so there's 3 episodes, each a half hour. The first one, episode 1, is on the brain, episode 2 is on relationships, and episode 3 is on society, and we call it Brain Heart World. And so the series is Brain Heart World, and it comes with discussion guides.
So
It's
where do we
also
find
free.
that?
That's on brainheartworld.org, which is also free.
Okay,
And you can watch that. I recommend. I've had parents stop me like in the most random places. I was at Home Depot checking out, and a parent tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Are you Clay Olson?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "I just had to tell you, I watched Brain Heart World with my 17-year-old boy, and it opened up communication that I didn't know was possible." And she starts tearing up in Home Depot, and we embraced in Home Depot, and it was like I was tearing up, she was tearing. It was great. I'm just saying that
so
it's
cool.
powerful to be able to have a conversation that you feel like is impossible. Like, I can't talk to my son about this, and yet the way it's approached, there's humor. There's I went to I traveled to different parts of the world in Germany, in the Max Planck Human Institute of Human Development, and interviewed Dr. Simon Kuhn, a neuroscientist there that did research on this. Like we got amazing interviews from amazing people and told amazing stories. So it's a wonderful docuseries. It's also
so
free.
much good.
Go check that out as well.
I do remember you telling me, this is a side note. I remember in one of our meetings, you telling me that you were in the airport or something and someone loudly was like, hey, you're that porn guy.
Yeah.
And you're like, no.
Yeah, that happens. I think my wife was a little more clued into when I told her that I was going to like leave my creative agency that I had started and I was going to go pursue this. I was going to like actually like go work on this nonprofit on pornography. You know, she was a little bit like, are you sure about that? Like, you know, she's so supportive and she's wonderful.
That's so cool.
But she saw a little bit of like that. That's going to be tough. And I was blind. I was just like, let's do this. And I was doing a presentation up in British Columbia at a school, private school. And the person introducing me kind of missed their words up. And she said, we'd like to introduce Clay Olson, and he's a celebrity in the porn industry. And I'm sitting off stage going, what? No. And the kids just burst into laughter. She didn't even know what she said. She's like, what? And I get up there and I'm like, okay, a little correction here. And it was really hard to rein that one back in. But anyway, yeah, it's kind of funny, and it's just, it comes with the.
So one last thing I wanted to ask you, and we had actually talked about this before. I remember this was, gosh, I feel so old saying this, but this was like close to 20 years ago. I remember watching something like Dateline or 2020 or one of those shows, and they had interviewed several people who were on death row, including Ted Bundy and a couple other people.
Yeah.
And they said one of the only things that these was all men, that all these men had in common, some of them, you know, they were white, black, Hispanic, whatever. Some of them were raised with money. Some of them were raised poor. The only thing that connected all of them was a pornography addiction. Murderers. These are mass murderers. These are like, you know, the craziest, the worst, the dregs of society. And that's not to say if you've looked at porn that you're the dregs of society. What I'm saying is that's a really weird thing to have in common that has to mean something.
Yeah, and I like that you said, like, just because you view pornography doesn't mean that you're going to develop into these things. Like there are a lot of people that consume pornography on a regular basis.
They're not mutually exclusive. No, I'm not saying
that don't, you know, have.
But if you are on death row, chances are you have been addicted.
Well,
to
not only that, like,
time.
so we speak with a lot of law enforcement who deal in trafficking, working with trafficking victims, working with pursuing perpetrators in the trafficking world. And not one, I've never spoken to an agent that has arrested a perpetrator that has not had a serious pornography challenge in their life. Like I've asked the question because it's my area. Like I want to know, and every single one said, "Oh, absolutely, 100%." And again, for those of you listening, there's a few things that I would want everyone to hear. Sure. Number one. There's a lot of shame wrapped up in this subject. So when we talk about this, there are these extremes that are very real and we have to face as a society. And we have to understand how pornography is linked to. I don't believe that we can fully fight trafficking in our society without acknowledging what is driving the demand, the source. So if we want to get serious about, and we're all serious, when you talk about trafficking, it's like everyone's up in arms, like fists in the air, like let's do something about it, right? But when it comes to pornography, like, well, yeah, but don't touch my porn. Like let's do this, but not that. And we got to recognize that they are interwoven. They are like the same 100%. Industry. They are the sexual exploitation industry, and there's not really separating them. Many of the women that are involved in the industry are trafficked women. And by definition, force, fraud, and coercion, they are women that are there because of circumstances they can't control. And so, and there's a lot of data around that as well. So I guess kind of recognizing that this is kind of something that is real, but then on the flip side of that, we have to then say, okay, for my 15-year-old son, for my 8-year-old son, for my 16-year-old daughter, which this is a problem for both boys and girls, and men and women, black or white. It doesn't discriminate. We need to recognize that there is an appropriate way to have those types of conversations that don't perpetuate the shame. Shame is associated with with perpetuating the very behavior you're trying to
Sure,
avoid.
yeah.
Whereas guilt and or is actually associated with course correction and improvement of that behavior. So guilt can be a healthy thing. It helps us recognize that, hey, this is misaligned with my values. Whereas shame really says, I am bad, and therefore why not continue the behavior, or might as well. And so oftentimes we inadvertently or unintentionally add to the shame that is being felt by
totally.
an individual or a spouse or a minor.
Which almost everyone has looked at pornography, especially, boys.
Yeah.
And I know it's not just a boy thing, but at some point. So yeah, that's such a
Yeah.
great
So
point.
rather than, this is more of like rather than you've done, you are a bad person. It's
Right.
like, hey, how can I help you? Like,
Yeah.
I love you. You're living in a world that is pushing you from behind with enormous force to struggle in this way. So I get it.
Yeah.
Like, you're normal, and these interests are normal. Let's talk about healthy ways. And if a parent can be involved in that conversation, rather than kind of like, I taught you better, and with consequences, and you should know
Gosh,
better.
how sad.
Then I think that can steer into a very healthy process where the child will work with the parents. And we've seen that as parents kind of open up and have very honest conversations.
love your child.
And then, share appropriately your own challenges to appropriate levels, where they can feel like this is something that, like, in the case of like father-son relationships, we can share like, hey, this is something that I struggled with too, and this is how I overcame that, and this is why it's beneficial, and that can often unlock some conversation as well for the youth. So shame, we've got to remove it from the conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's a beautiful.
It's here, and it's going to be here for a while. Yeah.
And there's a guide, a conversational guide found at ftnd.org, fightthenewdrug.org/blueprint. And it's kind of a blueprint for a conversation that you can have with a child. So actually you can identify who you are and who you're trying to talk to. If you're a child trying to talk to your parent, or a parent trying to talk to your child, or a parent trying to talk to your spouse, or a friend trying to talk to a friend, it kind of guides the conversation on how to have that appropriately.
So many resources.
Oh, yeah, so many resources.
You guys, Clay has spent so many countless hours trying to do this to help society and to help individuals. And I'm so impressed. And I know I said the last question before, but I really do have one last question. But I'm thinking back to, and I could talk about this for hours. I have so many questions, but for the sake of time, but I remember one of my friends, we were all on this trip together, and she said, and by the way, pornography is defined as what? What do you define it as? Because it's not just, you could be a book. It could be, right? It can be like...
you're opening up.
So I should ask that before I ask the question, right?
So the definition of pornography is somewhat tricky. Like a judge famously said,
you know it when you see it.
I see it, right? One definition that we often lean into is any content that was created with the explicit intent of sexual arousal.
Okay.
So that can be literature, and and oftentimes for girls, that is their entry point. That is their
and that gateway. Is still damaging.
Well, it can be, because again, it can. Research has shown that individuals that consume pornography in any form on a regular basis, with regard to relationships, it can affect what they love, how much they love, how they what they think about those that they love, how they think about those that they love, and how they even express love. And so it really has a profound influence of their dissatisfaction with their actual partner, because they don't live up to the standards that are set by pornography.
By this book, by this whatever.
So research shows that over time, the Gottman Institute, which is the leading relationship
I love John Gottman. Anything John Gottman, he's amazing.
He said that, they were silent on the subject of pornography for years and years.
Wow. And
eventually they came out publicly with an open letter to pornography and said, look, we have to break the silence. And in that letter, they said, due to a significant amount of research, we are forced to conclude that pornography poses a serious threat to relationship harmony and intimacy. And they go on to say that pornography was a major factor in the vast majority of failed relationships that they were studying. Wow. So when we talk about its influence on individuals and society, which we've talked a lot about, its really impact on our relationships.
Yeah, and then your brain, your wiring, everything.
So coming back to does literature have the same effect? Well, it's similar in the process. The same kind of neurochemical release can occur, and that kind of dopamine hit that reinforces the type of behavior that you're engaging in can still kind of
probably more powerful with images
over time to prefer the pixels or the words to people. we say people over pixels, because that's the reverse of what pornography is teaching.
So along those lines, I remember her saying this. She's like, she had been reading, I think it was 50 Shades of Grey or something like that. And she said, well, it's actually helped my marriage a lot. And so my question is regarding that specific scenario, but also so many people are, I don't want to say this in an accusatory way, like they're justifying it, but is there ever a good time or way to look at pornography ever?
I'm so glad you're covering this, because there are studies. I'll say it. There are studies that suggest positive impacts of pornography with relationships. Every one of those studies was measuring a very short-term
There you
uptick.
go.
So every one of those studies was suggesting, like, okay, you're in a marriage that is kind of on the fritz. You're kind of on different pages with regard to intimacy. You introduce this, and it causes an uptick of arousal and excitement and intrigue, and all of a sudden you're like, this is great. Every single longitudinal study that's been conducted on relationships have shown just the opposite. That over time, you end up preferring the pixels to people, that you end up preferring, because again, it's less work. You can turn to this more easily, and over time, pornography has been shown to increase your acceptance of cheating, your acceptance of promiscuous behavior. You're less likely to feel like there should be a heavier sentence for perpetrators of sexual assault. Like all these things based upon it's almost directly correlated with the amount of pornography access that you've encountered. So
wow. And longitudinal studies are really rare because there's attrition, there's fallout, there's, they take around 30 years, they're super expensive. And so, but the reason why they're more accurate is for those very reasons. And so when you see that versus a short-term study, you have to go with that one.
Right. Yeah. And so, anybody can have like hey, this has been great over the last 3 weekends. But to see this long term, and if anyone's interested listening on the research, they're like, I want to dig into the research.
Yeah.
I want to dive in. We created another resource called Truth About Porn, and it's truthaboutporn.com or .org, and you can go in there. And it's basically an archive of all of the literature and the research that you can filter. You can search like what is the impact of this on youth, and it pulls up the actual studies and the abstracts, and you can link directly to those. And so we send these to reporters and students or professors that are wanting to kind of consolidate that, and we worked with university professors to curate the material on that site. So that's a great place to turn as well.
Man, they've done so much, you guys. I'm like so proud and honored to be associated with this company, because you guys are doing so much for something so good. And I'm honored that you would be here to come share all this. And there's so much more. Like you said, go check out all that, because there's so much we don't have time to cover. But it shows proof that pornography has negative consequences, and deeply negative consequences. And that's exactly why I wanted to come on board with you guys, because I believe so much in that. And I believe that's what's breaking up the fabric of society, because it starts with the family.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you being here and being willing to share your vast amount of knowledge and studies and research. And
well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Of course. Thank you.